Why are they doing this? Does there have to be a why? Let's talk about The Strangers, Chapter 2.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. I have the Stone podcast. So, today we're going to be discussing or debating The Strangers Chapter 2. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is movie recommendation time. Guys, what's the best recent thing that we've seen?
I'm gonna get in and get out with this one, mainly because I don't think I've watched too much. And the one thing that I like actually was watching, which was Gen V season two, I think I fell asleep twice now on the opening episode. So I think I've just about completed the first episode, but it's set in the boys' universe. Season one was really good. Season one actually really took me by surprise to a point where it's like one of the first spin-offs that I actually thought was almost as good, if not maybe potentially better than the actual main series. It was like being it was spinning off from. Season two kind of kicks off on the same vein. Really good start. Obviously had to deal with the tragic passing of one of the actors, one of the main actors actually, that was part of the show. So they had to kind of like write that into the narrative, which I think they done in the most respectable way that they possibly could in that series. But it's kind of more in your face, kind of graphic, gory, wild stuff that you expect from things in the boys universe, but has an interesting story and kind of keen to see how it develops into the rest of the season.
Well, for me, I watched quite a few stuff, but one I would recommend was a Nollywood series. It was called To Kill a Monkey. It's pretty good. Of course, with Nollywood movies, it's not going to be like there are going to be inconsistencies, but I think the drama makes it all worth it. So it was just about a guy going through financial struggles. He's got a wife and obviously now newborn children. There is some mourning that happens in the beginning, but that's soon forgotten after he encounters an old, I wouldn't say old friend, but it's someone that he saved his life. And that person, unfortunately, is in the bad sides of business, as in like making illegal money, doing whatever he's doing. And then he goes on from a journey there, which soon leads to his potential demise. Obviously, I'm not going to give off too much, but yeah, I'd recommend.
So I rewatched The Fall Guy this weekend. Now, we talked about The Fall Guy about a year and a half ago. It was one of the earlier movies that we talked about. And I liked it a lot back then. And after rewatching it, I think I like it even more. So the story is essentially a stuntman gets injured during a movie shoot. He essentially retires because he's broken his back. He spends a while recovering and basically just completely goes off the radar. And then he gets a call where he's asked to work on a movie that his kind of girlfriend is directing. The pitch is, if this movie fails, you probably not get another chance. Do you want it on your conscience? And so he goes back to work, and then the lead actor disappears, and he's asked to kind of investigate the disappearance, and that kind of sparks off the plot where he basically uses his stuntman skills and background to do this investigation and survive the events that unfold from there. It's got a lot of charm. I think the action is still very good. It's very motivated by the character's background as a stuntman, where every major action scene is kind of informed by that. And just like we said a year and a half ago, the romance is pretty terrible, but the movie I think overall holds up, and I think it's one of those movies that is underappreciated, and a lot of people dismiss it for not very good reasons, in my opinion. Like every time I see somebody's opinion about this movie, they kind of write it off, usually without having seen it. And I think if you just like action movies that are competently done, that make good use of a gimmick, I think The Fall Guy is one of those. And I think it's being ignored a little bit unfairly. So that's my recommendation for the week.
Okay, well, it's an exciting time for the main event. Strangers Chapter 2. Daniel, may you please do your thing and may you please give us your synopsises.
Strangers Chapter 2 picks up from Strangers Chapter 1, where Maya, the survivor of Chapter 1, wakes up in the hospital, is recovering from her injuries. She's basically stuck in this small town and she's not sure who to trust, and the police seems a bit shady, and anybody could be the killers. And then the killers come back to finish the job, and then she has to run away and survive. And that's pretty much the movie. So, what did we think of The Strangers, Chapter 2?
My goodness, was this a tough watch in the cinema? It was almost a game of spot the inconsistencies in the movie or pick out the dumb things that are happening in the movie. I'm so glad I didn't watch chapter one. Unfortunately, I've been subjugated to watching chapter two, and I'm sure whenever chapter three comes out, I'll have to probably watch that as well. But God, like, I mean, there wasn't really anything to this movie. It was like a diet version of Tom and Jerry, of her just like running away from strangers. And anytime they almost get close to her, something miraculously happens and she gets away. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then it turns into like Diet the Revenant at one point with like a wild boar that is then after her, and I'm like, okay, cool. I don't know how this like plays into it. I don't know enough about boars, wild boars, or like boar logic to really understand like how he properly like tracks her and like hunts her down and like goes after her, whatever. I don't think there's really much redeeming qualities about this movie. I don't think I've got anything positive to say about this movie. Is kind of where I'm going with it.
It sounds like you're speechless.
No, genuinely, I couldn't believe how bad it was. What I was watching, I couldn't believe what like how things were unfolding. It's like basic things that they just didn't consider. Why are there not more people in this hospital? It's a question anyone would like ask. Why are there more people in the morgue than there are in the like actual living people in a hospital? How does that possibly make sense? We'll get into it. We'll get into it. There's nothing great about this movie. We're gonna get into it. There's so many examples of just how bad this movie is on all levels. There's nothing redeemable about this movie. Continue. Anyways, who's next?
One thing I will say, I definitely do agree on you when it says to when you pretty much said about the decision making. Because I was watching the movie, I was like flipping out, like the decision making in this film is borderline stupid. But I gave it some grace because, well, not some. I gave it a lot of grace because, as someone that likes, reading scripts and writing scripts, I'm like, it's not easy writing a script, Like sometimes you're trying to force justification for certain decisions that you make, and it's like writer's block kicks in, and then you're like, damn, I'm spending so much time on this. Let me just leave it, and hopefully, justification for why this happened will come later when I fix up the script a bit. You know what I'm saying? After a couple of drafts. But I can't lie to you. I kind of enjoyed this film. Surprisingly, I was surprised because the first one was so bad. It was so bad. And if you watch The Strangers, actually the original that came out, I think 2006, not too sure. The first 2006 one is a complete landslide. Well, no, in terms of the quality, it's a complete landslide. As in, like Strangers Chapter One, nowhere near as good as the original. And one of the issues was it had like especially like in terms of like just like the tension and like a lot of the horror came from silence. And that's something which chapter one in a way defiled because the background music and the stuff that it was adding, it was just loud. It's like this is not the film. This was one of the best things about the original was they made use of the silence and then being in the forest. A lot of the sounds that you hear was natural, but they kind of like abused it and just made it like a Gen Z BS pop type of film, right? With this one, it felt like they listened to the criticism and they kind of went back to its essence of the film. Even though what I'm saying is a bit contradictory because this is completely opposite from firstly the setting and just the pace of the film is completely different from the original. Like one was like a home invasion, claustrophobic environment, whereas the other one was a pretty much a survival slasher type of film chase that's happening across town. In that way is different. But one thing that I did really like was it was very silent. Like during her torment, there was a lot of moments where it was just silence and you heard natural sounds. And I was like, this feels refreshing. At least they're attempting to rectify their mistakes. So I'm not gonna make it seem like this was an amazing film, but I definitely will give them like a little clap because firstly they attempted to rectify their wrongs and they attempted to do something different in terms of like the psychological side of things. Like before in the original film, it pretty much evil was it just is what it was, right? They were just doing it without a reason. It was just like there doesn't have to be a reason. But in this one, they tried to kind of like attempt to cover the reason behind the madness and the evilness, even though it was very elementary the way that they covered it. At least they attempted. So they tried to do something different and tried to progress the storyline in a way that makes sense. But there were issues, a lot of issues, which I had issues with, but I definitely enjoyed the attempt. And like I said, I'm a sucker for survival movies. So I'm glad they rectified certain mistakes from the old previous film.
So I've never walked out of a movie, but this is the first time a movie walked out on me because the sound system in the cinema died about halfway through, around the time when Maya is in the woods and fighting the boar, and it just turned into a silent movie. And then after a few minutes, the pre-movie music started playing, when they play the Indiana Jones music and the Star Wars music. And so for a while, I was watching the strangers stalk Maya to the sound of the Imperial March from Star Wars, which was kind of funny. But eventually, the showing got kind of canceled, and so I've not seen past the boar fight, and that is kind of my problem. And I've kind of read up on the plot, but that's a caveat in my impressions of the movie. But I have a feeling just reading the plot synopsis is that I didn't miss anything. That it's basically just a whole bunch of plot and not much going on in the second half. I'm missing about the last 30 to 40 minutes. So the overall impression is basically like I think the first 15 minutes are okay. This whole thing, Maya wakes up in the hospital and everybody's a bit weird, and people are making cryptic remarks. It's not amazing, but it's kind of functional, and we're kind of setting a stage. And then when the strangers show up, it kind of all turns into nonsense. It all turns into slasher movie cliche. There's a lot of running around. There's a lot of being terrified. The strangers always catch up with her and she always gets away. And that whole cycle repeats 7 or 8 times. I did not find anything at all to kind of latch onto in that sequence. I think most of it is pretty bad. Just to give you one example, like when she's kind of in the basement, the scarecrow guy is after her, and she's kind of looking to the left and there's nowhere to hide, and she looks to the right and there's nowhere to hide. She just crouches down out of frame, and that's how she hides. But physically in the scene, there's no way for her to hide there. I just laughed out loud in the cinema when I saw that. It's just so stupid. And then the scene follows Scarecrow, and then she kind of comes out of her closet on the other end of the room behind him and runs away, which means she must have teleported as well. That's just one scene, that's just one example, but kind of the entire movie after the strangers show up in the hospital is kind of like this. Like nothing makes any kind of sense, nothing is interesting, nothing is creative, and it doesn't amount to anything. That's kind of my impression from what I've read about the ending. Eventually, she kills one of them and then gets away, and it's kind of the ending, right? Like there's not much, not much else going on in this movie, and so I think this feels a lot like the middle part, like the second act of a movie, but it's the entire movie. And for that reason, it has no structure, no plot, nothing that makes a movie. It's just a sequence of events. And it's basically the worst impulses of a slasher movie, which is we have a little bit of setup, and then there's a lot of running and screaming and hiding and dying. And that's kind of the rest of the movie. So not a good one. Let's talk about it.
My favorite thing in this movie was how they toggled on and off the injuries that people had in various scenes. And I don't know the extent of her injuries in chapter 1, but she's presumed to have died, although the strangers felt like they've done enough damage to her for her to be dead. But I don't know how much time had passed between then. It didn't seem like there was like that much time that had passed between then and when this movie takes place. But it's things like in the hospital, she's running full pelt, like she has no injuries. She's just kind of gets up and is like hauling it down the hallways at full pace. And this man, or this scarecrow mask guy, can't catch her, even though he's also like running at full pace, but can't catch someone that's been stabbed multiple times. So that's kind of like one place where they toggle off her injuries. And then later down the line, when she's kind of running in the woods, she starts to hold her stomach because she'd been stabbed previously. So she's now like running but holding her stomach because she's injured while she's running away. And I get things like adrenaline and stuff like that in that particular moment, but there are so many examples of this, not just with Maya, but also with the strangers when they get injured or when they get hurt in this movie. And I was literally like, what rules are we following? Like, what is actually happening? Are you just kind of making it up scene by scene as to how bad, or like, are you over exaggerating how bad some of these injuries are meant to be, or whatever? But I'm very sure for the strangers, when you get stabbed in the stomach with a rake or whatever it's called, and then maybe like 10 minutes later, you're kind of fine and you're like, walking around with your knife, kind of taunting her and like ready to kill her. I'm like, what the hell is going on with the injuries? I just couldn't take any of it seriously at all.
Yeah, it's very inconsistent. Like in some scenes, it doesn't matter at all. And then occasionally she will hold her side saying, ow. And that's kind of the extent of it. And then there is the one scene in the forest where she has to stitch up her own stomach wound. I saw that scene without sound, but it looked like that was probably the most intense scene or the most emotional scene in the entire movie, where she's kind of just in the woods at night. She's cold, she's hungry, she's afraid, and she's trying to keep it together. And I actually do think kind of the actress kind of does as much as you can with this character. And I think that scene is where she really tries. She tries in the others as well, but I think that is the one where I said, yeah, okay, this looks like a real movie, like a real character with like emotions and stuff. But everything else, it's just the most basic horror cliches, and nothing matters. And at the end of every scene, you do a reset button. One of the things that really struck me is, and I think horror movies are kind of bad about the, or like slasher movies are pretty bad about this to begin with, kind of the object permanence, where characters are and how quickly they can move, and like the teleporting slasher villain and all of that. Like that's just one of those cliches. And here it's just extreme, because every scene kind of has kind of a similar kind of cycle to it. Maya wanders around this location. The stranger catches up with her. She hides. She's almost discovered. Then she is discovered, and she narrowly gets away. And it's like every scene.
How far did you get with the boar scene? Like, at what point did the cinema shut off the screening?
Right after the boar scene.
Oh, right. Oh, so you saw how the boar kind of like mangled her leg and really tore at her. And then there was like the whole, okay, oh, she kills a boar. But there's a whole scene where she can't even put her foot like flat down. It's like she's kind of like holding it, like toe pointing down, and she's kind of like dragging it along. And then I think it's like a scene or two later, she's just kind of like walking on it, like it's fine. And I'm like, how can you just like not pick that up at any point while you're filming or editing, or if that's the case, don't make the injuries as bad or build up her injuries through the movie. Don't like insult my intelligence and have her have some of the worst wounds that you can have, and then just her be fine afterwards. I don't know. Scratching my head a lot with it.
And there are ways to make this work. She actually gets pain meds right before the strangers show up, right? It's a pretty aggressive schedule, it looks like. So you could set up something where for the first couple of scenes, she's on the pain medication, so she doesn't really realize how badly she's injured. And then halfway into the movie, they wear off, and now she has to keep going, but the pain keeps coming back. And now what does she do now, right? So there would have been a way to make this matter and to make this interesting. But I feel like it's completely back and forth, right? It's just whatever seems convenient in this particular sequence. There doesn't seem to be a progression to it, which is a wasted opportunity. Like there's already not much going on here. It's literally just there's a guy with a knife and she's running away. That's about it. If you want to make this interesting, you need to add things that kind of like twists or wrinkles or little complexities. And the pain meds are actually a decent one, because that's not standard for slasher movies, right? So maybe there's even a ticking clock where she knows, okay, maybe she wouldn't know by the minute how long they last, but she kind of realizes, okay, I have to get to shelter soon because these pain meds are going to wear off eventually. It's just a really obvious way to improve the story, I think. And stuff like that is just entirely missing. Any kind of creativity, I think, where you go beyond the absolute minimum a little bit. And there's like all sorts of cliches, like I think Herbert, you mentioned this, where apparently there are two people in the hospital. We hear a security guard be killed, kind of off screen, and then there's a guy who's apparently picking up organs at 2 a.m. in the morgue. I'm not sure that it works that way, but he's the one guy, and he kind of walks in on Scarecrow and gets killed immediately.
Just in time for her to get away, because in that particular moment they had no other way for her to get away. So it had to be someone picking up an organ or a hospital worker for whatever reason.
Yeah, but there's nobody else. There's no night nurses, there's no doctors, there's no other patients, nobody. It is like a small town, it's like a rural hospital, whatever. But surely there's somebody. Surely the strangers didn't kill everybody. I've not spent much time in hospitals, but like there's people all over the place. And it's a 24-hour operation. There's night nurses, people are on watch. There's even a scene where she notices that the night guard gets killed, and she realizes what's going on. So she pulls off her, whatever, like the thing that measures your pulse. And the machines go nuts because they think she's flatlined, drawing attention to her. Like maybe she has no reason before that to think that Scarecrow or the strangers know what room she's in. But now her machines are going off, like alerting doctors and whatever, right? Doctors that apparently don't exist. But also she's trying to hide and these machines are going off. And wouldn't it have been a cool sequence if she's kind of looking at her finger at this machine and realizes, I have to leave, but if I leave, I draw attention to myself. I'm already in pain. I'm already on meds. I'm not thinking clearly. I'm exhausted. I should be recovering for weeks. And now I have to make this judgment call, and I have to make this judgment call now. Couldn't there be a like a tense scene where she has to time when she pulls off this thing in order to maximize her chances? Maybe she needs to let, like, Scarecrow is passing before her window and she has to time it in such a way to give her the best chance or something. You know what I mean? Like something where the specifics of that particular setup matter to her decision making. And it doesn't. She just pulls it off, the alarms go off, and then we're in slasher mode. But then she's also not running away. She's slowly walking down dark corridors, terrified, with close-ups on her face to show how scared she is. She's not running away. She's like, why are you, like, this is a decently well lit hallway. Why are you not, why are you just walking down it slowly? None of this is intentional. And that, I think, is the problem with all of these movies. Like the entire Strangers chapter 1, chapter 2, is that stuff is happening because it feels like that's how slasher movies should be, but it's not intentional. It's not specific to the circumstances. It's not making use of the constraints that the characters are in. And so it's all generic, and it all has to ignore everything around it, what happened before, to make the scene happen. And then I think that is why it's so frustrating. And as a result, it unfolds like every slasher movie ever.
And to kind of add to that whole context of like things not being really intentional in this movie, like the other thing about like the whole hospital sequence was the way that the locked doors work. Anytime she was like running away and, you know, was trying to get somewhere, she would conveniently run into a locked door that would prevent her from like going into a door or like getting somewhere, but somehow was also able to like move freely throughout, you know, most of the different like areas and levels in the hospital at the same time. It was like a really like weird thing. Anytime it was like a pressure moment, the door would be locked. And it's like, that's just not how hospitals worked. And like, how do the strangers have like such free roam to kind of like maneuver around the hospital so freely? This is a patient that's just survived almost being killed. Like, I get having like, you know, you had the one security guard that was there, but no real police presence, no real like putting her behind like, you know, some safety locks that only staff can get into. And again, I've never been to a hospital in America, so I don't know whether it's like the same in the UK, but in the UK there's wards, and if you don't have a pass, you're not getting into that ward. And it just felt like they kind of played fast and loose with a lot of things, but also with how like the locks worked in the hospitals, which just confusing. Again, it just shows lack of intent, and it shows like lack of care for the work that you're doing, the story that you're telling. And actually, my characters in this particular situation in this hospital, what's the realistic way for things to play out? Like you said, like, you know, when you're about to detach yourself from this particular machine, it's going to make a lot of noise, and you know it's going to make a lot of noise because you made it make a lot of noise in the movie. Why not take the extra time to think, okay, how can this be used as a device, as opposed to how can we just build up tension where she almost gets caught, but she's not going to get caught, she gets away. And it's like especially as it's the start of the movie, so we know she's not dying, even though she probably should have died like 600 times before we even got to like anywhere close to the end of the movie. But it's just a case of, we know she's not going to die, but how do you build that tension? How do you build realistic tension in that particular situation? And it kind of like tie back to, you know, Mission Impossible earlier this year, where you know he's not going to die, but how do you create situations which kind of grasp the audience and like, you know, really make you feel the situation that the character's in, like the submarine scene. And this movie missed the mark on it by a long way.
And we know Maya is not going to die because she's in part 3, because she's the only recognizable actor in this.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, you know, we know from the start she's going to survive. So you can't, first of all, there has to be a final girl because this is a slasher movie, and there's only one female character. Like, there isn't like a lot of slashers will have like a group of people who die one after the other, and one character, almost always a woman, survives. That's the final girl, and that's the genre convention. But you don't know ahead of time who that's going to be. If it's one person, it has to be her. And that's like, even if you don't know that a part 3 is coming, you know she's not going to die 40 minutes into the movie. This is not Hitchcock, this is not Psycho, where we switch main characters twice. There's nothing like that going on here. So, yeah, like you said, like the tension cannot come from will she survive? The tension has to come from something else. A competent filmmaker, and, you know, in Renny Harlin's defense, this is only his 4th decade making movies. So we shouldn't expect too much. right? And that's my sarcasm quota for the day. Somebody with that much experience should know a thing or two about storytelling, and it should be apparent. I think this is like in general, if you're making horror movies, slasher movies, but also or just any action movie, the tension cannot come from will the character survive. If the outside knowledge the audience brings into this makes it clear that yes, they will survive. So much like in Mission Impossible, it has to come from something else. And that in Mission Impossible, it's the fact that these are practical stunts. And so admiring the craftsmanship and the skill and expertise is the fun. It's not, will Ethan Hunt survive? But here, there's nothing like this. There's nothing to take that place. And I think that is kind of one of the things that just makes it boring. I just outright don't care how scared Maya is and how exhausted she is and how wounded she is. We're just going to get fake out after fake out until the movie is over. In my view, anybody who wants to make a movie like this has to think about, okay, what can I put in there instead that is rewarding to the audience rather than just the threat of endangering the characters. So that is just completely missing, and that already kills the movie basically, because there are things you can put in here, right? Like if they make us really care about Maya, which I didn't, if there's like a subtext or like a theme or a mystery or something that is not related to will Maya survive, but it's something else, that absolutely could have done that job. I think the thing that gets closest is getting the background on the strangers, right? Like the origin story. So I missed most of that. But is it really just that somebody was mean to them as a child? Or is there something else?
That's actually another thing that really bothered me about this movie was so like at the start of the movie, it kind of quotes that however many like 1,600 plus people are like killed by people that they don't know at the start of the movie.
By the way, that also means basically nobody dies from strangers. It's like 1,600 people a year in the United States. What's the population of the United States? Like close to 400 million?
Yeah.
Call it 350 million. Out of 350 million, 1,600 are killed by strangers per year. I don't even care enough to work out the percentage, but it's nothing. You know, anybody who ever talks about like violent crime and abductions and kidnappings will tell you it's somebody the victim knows, a family member, a parent, a spouse. Like it is in fact not random, right? But like the movie just throws. Like I was almost laughed. Like there was like a decent turnout, more than I expected in my cinema. Like almost 10 people, I think, like 9 or 10 people. And there were several times in the movie where I had to stifle a laugh because it was just so dumb. And I've mentioned most of them now, but the opening statistic, I think it was similar with the original Strangers, but ultimately it's just a way of saying almost nobody gets killed by strangers in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are really, really unlikely to be killed by a stranger. That's what the number says. But they present it as, oh, at 1,600 people. Can you imagine that? Imagine 1,600 people in a football stadium. No, but just as a percentage of the population, it's nothing. So that already undermines its point, right? Like it is not, in fact, like Stranger Danger was a moral panic, right? Like it was never about people just snatching people off the street. Like that happens. But it's just, if something bad like that happens to you, you're much more likely to be the victim of somebody you know. That already invalidates this whole based on a true story. Like this is not even based on a true story. This is based on a true statistic, which is just even lamer. Like based on a true story is already nonsense, like marketing nonsense. It's almost never true. If it is true, it is highly embellished or what. Like it's not. You're not really getting something that's really true in almost all cases.
You guys can't really say that because most documentaries are anomaly situations. You're not really going to call them
right. But like the idea of that opening title card is this is something that can happen to you at any time. This is something that's going on all the time, everywhere. This could happen to anybody. And that's kind of the ethos of the Strangers, right? Like this is random. Like in our discussion of the original Strangers from 2008, we kind of talked about how it's not really that because they actually scout for locations and they look for easy targets. So it's not all that random. The original couple, right, where they're at home, they were picked because it was late at night, they were tired. If there was a football team hanging out in that house, the strangers would have gone over to the next house to see if there's an easier target there, right? It's not all that random. But the title card kind of implies that this is like an epidemic of stranger on stranger killing. And that is just not the case. And the number doesn't even support it. And they just expect you to not understand numbers because you're just supposed to say, oh, that's a big number. But you're not supposed to think about it. And if you do, even for half a second, it kind of undermines its impact.
Yeah,
like, you're absolutely right. Like, this is stuff that happens, right? This can happen to somebody, but it's not an everyday thing.
Yeah, I hear what you guys are saying. I think if you have a beef with this, then you surely should have a beef with the Halloween franchise, because the points that you guys have been mentioning, yeah, I do agree to an extent. However, it didn't cause a problem for me because this is what slasher, I want to say survival movies, but definitely in the slasher genres, is pretty much built on unrealistic events, sequences of events. So the stuff that you guys were talking about, you could provide justification if you're in the realms, thinking in the realms of slasher movies. I think in terms of one thing that I enjoyed, and I think one thing that I wouldn't say you guys were missing, but in terms of how the strangers operate, their method of torment comes from giving you brief hope that you can get away. So a lot of the times, like for example, when you're saying why is she walking, why is she not running in the hospital? She knows how these guys operate. She's encountered them before. And if you're running in the corridor, they could just pop out from the end. So she's very cautious. So she's not like she's like walking, she's like speed walking. So she's very cautious with her surroundings. She's very cautious what could be at the other side, at the other end of where she's going. Do you know what I'm saying? So I kind of saw it as being justified as in why she was operating that way, especially when she was in pain. Like a lot of the time you're saying, oh, but she just got stabbed in the stomach and stuff like that. It's like, how can she be doing what she's doing? Well, you can say, well, it's a slasher, and a lot of the time you could just justify it by saying adrenaline kicks in. When you're in a life or death situations, you're not even thinking, even though, yeah, cool, you are in pain, but when you're in that mode, you can fight through it. You know what I'm saying? And that scene was just, and that's kind of like a justified opinion with obviously when she's stitching herself up. We've seen that in many movies. You know what I'm saying? And you know what I'm saying, the pain that she's going through in that situation, she managed to kind of overcome that pain. So she's already in that mode. I do agree there was a inconsistency with when she went from limping to driving. I don't know which leg was injured, but I thought it was the leg that she was driving with, which was injured. All in all, I think if it's a thing where you guys have issues with this, then surely you should have issues with the Halloween franchise, especially when the strangers were getting hurt. Like one scene which didn't make sense to me is how she got stabbed in the stomach and she managed to survive. But then again, I remembered Michael Myers and the stuff that he withstanded. I'm like, yo, like, well, clearly they get their inspiration from stuff like that. And even the way that the strangers were acting at times, I was like, this is a bit like, why wouldn't you just kill her straight away? Like, especially like when she was in the room, for example, when she got to the other strangers, the good strangers' house, and then there was a girl the girl with mask was standing right behind her when she was in the room. I was like, why wouldn't you just stab her then? But then I remembered, this is their form, this is their way of tormenting their victims. So they're following onto the theme. Even in the original movie, that's their way of torment. They stuck to that theme and they stuck to that method of tormenting their victims by just playing with them, giving them hope. It was very childlike, and that's how they were operating. Very childlike behavior. But it got to a point which I found interesting, where even though they were patient with her and they were tormenting her, there were times where they were desperate. It was different to see, and that's something that I kind of enjoy. I'm like, okay, I can see that they're starting to get desperate now. They're just trying to finish her off, but they're having struggles with it. And there's times where, especially like times where there was a stranger where he's running, you don't really see that a lot in the original film. Is they kind of operate like Michael Myers as well. But in this one, there were times where they were running. There was urgency. So I did have issues as well with the way that they would just pop up and they'll conveniently pop up in certain places. I'm like, okay, I don't know how the hell you got from point A to B, but that's a bit mad. But then again, I remembered Michael Myers. You know what I'm saying? He would walk and catch his victims. Whereas with these strangers, they had a bit more justification the way that they would pop up from A to B because they were running at times and they were driving their cars.
So, a couple of things here. One of them is most slasher movies are not great. This is already a genre that does not have very many good entries. The Strangers Chapter 2 comes after all of them, and so it had opportunity to learn from all of them and think about, okay, why do these not work and what can we do differently? One of the things the original Strangers got into is how they play and mess with their victim before they actually attack. In the original, that was things like knocking on the door, banging on the door, calling, I think they either call the phone or they sever the phone lines. They block off the chimney so that all the smoke alarms go off. They have the strategy of wearing down their victim before they actually attack. And that is not happening here. They are just slasher villains. They are just walking after their victim with a knife. And that's about it. They're simply coming for her to kill her to finish the job. They are not using their standard methods. It robs them of all identity. Now they're just as generic as it gets.
They want to kill her up until the moment that they have the opportunity to kill her. Because I think, Jonathan, you mentioned about when they were in the bedroom. Again, how I perceived it was that they were trying to finish the job on her and they were trying to clean up the situation. that carried over from their last kill. Jonathan, you were kind of like saying about like how they were actually like running and actually like, you know, trying to like get to her with purpose in this particular movie. And then you get a scene like in the bedroom where she's right behind, like you're right behind her, she's wide open. But because we can't kill off the main character in this movie, she's not going to die, or she's going to have the opportunity to fight back and then lock herself in the bathroom. And like what you were saying kind of like at the very start about like kind of comparing it to other slasher movies. And I think I slightly agree with Daniel on this, where I don't think I actually like really love the genre as a whole anyways. It's not like my kind of movie. But at least with the others, there's like some type of like build up, or there's some type of like development of like, you know, the characters, no matter how bad or how good it's done, there is that element to it. Whereas this kind of just like dives straight into the whole like slasher element of it and really like carries it throughout the entirety of the movie. There's nothing wrong with it if the tension that you're building is done well. And I just don't feel like the tension or like the situation that they were in was that good or really that compelling, which is why. And I agree with you. It's like I'm guilty of overlooking certain stuff in certain movies where I'm just like, oh, because I like this, because I like that, I'll give it a pass. But when I'm not having a good time, and when your main shtick is, you know, this cat and mouse game, I'm gonna find a flaw. If I'm not enjoying it and everything's kind of just rubbing me the wrong way in the movie, I'm just naturally gonna pick out a lot more of the flaws than I would do if I was enjoying the movie and I was like, oh, actually, you know, maybe she was meant to be injured, but she wasn't. Actually, it's okay. I was enjoying the movie. I'll kind of give it a pass. It's kind of like where we probably like land on two different sides of it, where you can kind of excuse it because you kind of like the movie and you kind of like enjoy what you saw. Whereas I'm like, I was just hating my experience. So like everything that's happening, I'm like, this is crap. This is dumb, pretty much. So
A movie like this has to offer you something, right? It has to be either really, really good or it has to do something interesting. So the original Strangers had the mind games, the original Halloween, and I think there are more bad Halloween movies than good ones, where Michael Myers has a lot of the same problems, where it's not clear just how powerful he is and how he always catches up with people, and he seemingly always knows where he needs to be and all of that. Those are all flaws in those movies. But the original Halloween very much has this sense of dread because Michael Myers does not attack after 15 minutes. A whole bunch of time goes into explaining just how disturbed and evil Michael Myers is, but also the sense of being watched, right? Like there are extended sequences in the original Halloween where people see Michael Myers watching them from across the street, from behind a bush, through the clothes lines, all of that, right? And he just keeps getting closer and closer until he finally attacks. And that is the bulk of the movie. Much like The Exorcist, most of the exorcism is not the bulk of The Exorcist, and other exorcism movies get this wrong by usually starting with the exorcism or making it the bulk of the movie, which is a mistake too. So a movie like this has to offer something that is not simply will the victim survive or let's see her run around a dark corridor and be scared.
do you think the movie missed a trick in a sense that like the whole premise is these are strangers and you don't know what they look like, and you like, especially in her case, I'm guessing she'd like, because I only watched the original, and in the original they take off the mask before they kill him at the end. But I'm guessing that because she in that final scene was like hesitant to take off the killer's mask to see who was behind the mask. But I really feel like they could have played the movie completely different, where it's not the strangers coming after her for 90% of the movie, but actually maybe she's stuck in this like little town because of everything that's happened, because of her injuries, and because like she's trying to get back on her feet, and maybe she has to like cooperate with the police to try and like figure things out or like that, so she can't leave. You could have put her in many different situations, which they tried to do in this movie, but they did it in such a bad way, and it was like really frustrating to watch. But they could have just put her in situations where she's just in regular settings and there's people around, but she doesn't know who to trust. And maybe like there's like, you know, a few things that put her on edge, or she's like, you know, a little bit more cautious, or she's a little bit more nervous. And I think, I don't know, like horror genre, slashes, etc., but I don't know how many have had this situation where in the second movie the person survived but doesn't know that it's like a Michael Myers or whatever. They just know that it was someone that was after her, and she don't know who. As a unique situation to really explore. And again, if you really want to get into the whole like stranger danger, is being in these like public settings but not really knowing like who's stalking you or who's after you, or like, you know, who's like watching your every move and like who can you really trust and whatever. And like I said, like when they try to do it in this scene, like when she gets into the car and stuff like that, it's done in the worst way possible. It's not believable because you've just picked up someone that almost got murdered, but you have someone in the front pulling out this like big knife and eating an apple with it in front of someone that's just been stabbed, and you have this like absolute weirdo like you sit her between two male characters in this for whatever reason, and you have one of the male characters be absolutely weird and just like stare her out and stare her in the face and stuff like that, and it's like it's not believable, it's not realistic. So the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, what the hell? Like, I know she's meant to be like weirded out by it, but I'm like, it just like it's taken me out of the movie because it's not a realistic portrayal. It's not even like a misunderstanding where in her mind she maybe like is misunderstanding people's intentions because of her experiences and because of what she's going through. It's no, these are like very dumb things to be experiencing, like someone having a big hunting knife and sort of eating an apple with it. Just rationally, it just doesn't make sense. The whole how she even got out of the car is its own thing in itself, because she sat between two people but manages to open the door and like fly out of the car. That's like a whole other thing, which is just absolutely dumb. I don't know. I just felt like there was like a much better movie in there of I'm in a hospital that's packed full of people. Can I trust these nurses? Can I trust the doctors? Can I trust whoever? Like who's really after me? I'm in this diner or I'm in this coffee shop or whatever. Like I'm being stalked, but I just don't know who by. And it's now a guessing game as to who's really after and who the strangers are amongst this sea of like strange faces.
So the only part I disagree about with that is I think it's even dumber than you said, or even worse, because so you're absolutely right. So they absolutely lose their unique thing about being strangers, right? Because we can't like we don't like they're still wearing masks, but they're just coming after the victim. I think you're right that this whole who can she trust angle should have taken the place of the stranger danger, right? She knows that somebody in the town is the stranger, but she has to guess who it is, and if she guesses wrong, she dies, right? And they kind of do this, right, where the police is kind of weird about it. And, since I missed the ending, I don't know if they ever pay this off about what the police is up to. They don't? Okay, then another shrug. It's ambiguous about whether or not the police can be trusted. Like, they're clearly up to something, but it's not clear what it is. The thing in the car, like, I think a scene like this has to be subtle enough and ambiguous enough that a reasonable person could trust them. You know what I mean? Like there's something off about them, but not enough to the point where you conclude, okay, they've got to be strangers. But here it's so weird and so in your face. And the knife is part of it, but also the tattoo and the convenience that they just happen to be there on the road, right? So it's not ambiguous enough to actually be suspenseful. What if this entire thing had been like a cat and mouse game where she's in the hospital for much of the movie, or is maybe released after a few days and has to be in town for a couple of days until this private EMT that her sister has hired arrives, and she has to live there, and somebody is after her, and most of the town is trying to protect her, but she doesn't know who. So she has to make these guesses about who to trust, which is kind of like Barbarian, remember, right? Where like a large chunk of that movie is about trusting the wrong person, where you have to make assumptions about who you can trust, and if you get that wrong, that can end badly for you. And they could have done something similar here, where the anonymity of the killers manifests in trust this time. That would have been an interesting, like Jonathan, you said earlier, but what do? You can't do the same thing again, right? And that's completely correct. You can't make the exact same movie again. It has to be something different. I think this is what it could have been, instead of like stripping away everything that was distinctive and unique and characteristic of the strangers. One more question. So this is one I kind of missed. So I kind of saw the flashback, but I was missing sound, and I think I didn't get all of it. But we are shown flashbacks about who the strangers are, right? And in the very beginning, we are shown at least who is it pinup girl, right? Like one of the two women. It's kind of implied that we are shown the first time she does the knocking on the door and asking for Tamra thing. Does this movie benefit from giving the strangers whose entire thing is being faceless and anonymous, giving them a tragic background story? Does it help? Does it do anything? Could it have done anything, or is it just a mistake?
So I remember in our original discussion of The Strangers, I think one of the things that I said was I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more about their story and like know a little bit more about like who they were and like how they ended up here. And we got this in the movie, and I was wrong. It's so much better when we don't know who the hell these people are. And I tried to touch on that at the start, and I think you went on a whole like sidetrack about the statistic that we got at the start of the movie. But kind of like bringing it back to that point, what I was trying to say around that was the whole like premise of the movie was that the randomness of it, and you don't know who it could be. I feel like with the flashbacks and with the kind of like story they tried to tell of, this girl that was like a little bit of an outsider, wasn't like one of the popular kids, wasn't part of the cool kids. It doesn't really add to the randomness of it because it's a stereotype that you kind of expect to see. Oh, that like that lonely kid that no one really speaks to, no one really hangs out with, only has like one friend, is a bit different, likes really obscure animals and stuff like that, is the one that turns out to be the killer. It's like, okay, no shit, Sherlock. Like we've seen this in like countless other movies where you could have approached it differently, and you could have approached it where maybe it isn't because of their childhood, maybe it's because they just like killing. Maybe it's like someone that accidentally killed one time, and maybe just like the feeling of it, but is an absolute normal person behind it, or just something that is different to the usual explanation we get for why bad people do terrible things, of it just being because of their childhood and because they were a bit of a loner. And it's not even like implied that she was like really treated that badly. I mean, I think the worst thing that happened to her was people stood on her sandcastle that she'd built. If you're gonna really like speak to the randomness of it, and you never know who to trust or whatever like that, add some variety to the backstory, add some variety to the type of killer that you could be after you. Because if I know, oh, like don't go near the awkward kid, or they say in America, like the quiet kid ends up being like the school shooter and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, we kind of expect it, or like that's the stereotype that's in everyone's head, pretty much.
First of all, this is like Star Wars syndrome where they explain every single thing, right? Like this whole thing about knocking on the door and asking for Tamra is apparently derived from this game that these children played and that she was excluded from, right? Like I caught that much. That's pretty much it, right?
They did it as kids, and then all these years later, you're still playing that game. I don't know. It's weird. I
And
don't know.
she's not even taking revenge on the people who shunned her, right? Like if they were doing this to target the people who bullied her as a child and they're rubbing it in by asking for Tamra or whatever, then I could say, okay, you're doing something. That at least could be something. But no, it's just complete random people who have no idea what this is, right? It just seems to be just completely like they're so damaged by this experience and so traumatized by having been excluded on the playground, apparently, that they have to kind of build their entire shtick around that game. I think this is one of those things. I'm building up to something here. Like I'm kind of working myself up a little bit. Like this is meant to seem significant, right? Somebody is meant to make a 38-minute explainer video on YouTube explaining the symbolism of the strangers, right? And they're supposed to explain how every single piece is reflected in this flashback and whatever. But ultimately, it doesn't say very much, or it doesn't create an interesting reason for this person to act this way. I don't think it's just creating parallels that are meant to feel significant. That's kind of my impression that I got. And then at the same time, it just removes everything from them, like the masks and the anonymity and the randomness. Once you give somebody a motive, that is just gone. And the weird thing is, this was done on purpose, right? Like Strangers Chapter 2 was supposed to come out about a year ago, I think October last year. And the feedback to Chapter 1 was so bad that they delayed it by a year and reshot much of it. And this entire sequence with the flashback on the playground, that is one of the reshoots, where they edited this to make the movie better.
I'm kind of like left scratching my head at why they thought that would be a good addition. All of this kind of like always like ties back to not really understanding why people fall in love with movies. It's like, yeah, like, and like, I just feel like we just got like one whole long slasher movie. And it's like, yeah, I know people enjoy slashers and people getting killed in that action, but to really stand the test of time, to really actually have some cultural relevance, or like actually have some staying power in people's minds, you kind of have to just really think about like characters that you're building out in this. And everything just seems so generic. Everything just kind of seems so like genuinely like the fact that they like really came out of it. I don't know if that's part of the problem, but the fact that they really came and said, okay, we're going to make this a trilogy and we're going to shoot this back to back and we're just going to release it in this particular schedule. It screams that no real thought was put into the story, really. I guess they like maybe want to focus on how they like slowly progress the strangers across the three movies or something like that. But in this particular movie, you've kind of stripped away everything that actually made the strangers unique in this genre. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm okay with them changing what the strangers are about if they go to somewhere interesting. And I guess they have one more movie to do it, but we're two movies into a trilogy, and there's still no hint of an interesting idea. I guess the most interesting thing is that apparently Maya puts on the mask in an after credit scene. Is that correct?
I actually didn't know that there was an after credit scheme. So I actually caught the end of the credit scene because I dropped my Apple Watch in the cinema. I had it on my lap. I got up because as soon as the credits rolled, I was out of that place. So I got up a little bit too fast, dropped my Apple Watch, got downstairs, realized I dropped it, went back up, and saw that there was more movie being played. So I actually didn't really catch the credit scene. I didn't care enough to really check out what actually happened. Apparently, she puts on a mask. I don't know the significance of that or what that potentially like means or leads to.
Yeah, so that's one thing where I say, okay, that could be something. But of course, that would happen in the last movie of a trilogy. That's too little, too late. But in principle, kind of the victim of a slasher becoming the slasher and putting on the mask and all of like, I've seen enough superhero movies to know what putting on the mask means, right? Like it has the potential to be something. But at this point, I'm just out of patience. I'm out of charity. I'm out of grace. I'm just no longer willing. Like, and if the third one has an interesting idea, and they've built up to that idea this entire time, then okay, but there's just no clues that's actually the case. So I think this is very much a cash grab. They shot this for nothing. I think the movie already made its money back after the first one because that one I think made 50 million, something like that. Everything chapters 2 and 3 do is profit. That's just a really solid investment for the studio, right? So this has made 6 million, which is not much. By itself, that's not a success. But if that is pure profit because the first one already made enough money, this is just a good investment, right? Back in our review of chapter 1, I kind of went into how they hired some Hungarian extras to play the stranger. So those weren't even played by actors that you kind of have to pay. So this entire thing is just an exercise in how much slasher movie can we make for as little money as possible and people will still show up. And I think that is one of those reasons why I'm not willing to give it any kind of benefit of the doubt. That is why 90 minutes of horror movie cliches are not good enough. And waiting for it to get good in a sense, right? Like if the first one was kind of an outlier, but 2 and 3 were really solid, then I would have been honest about that. I would have said, okay, that's what it is. But 2 is just more of the same, right? And I actually have a conspiracy theory about how this entire thing is a prank. And this is like 60% serious. Because these two movies, if you just take them by themselves, right, and just look at what they are undistinguishable from practical jokes. So the first one is the unnecessary sequel that coasts on the name of a fairly well-liked movie. It is cheap to make, the characters are generic, they make a whole bunch of horror movie mistakes like characters making really dumb choices. It's basically indistinguishable from somebody parodying a unnecessary sequel or unnecessary reboot, right? Like completely soulless, completely devoid of ideas, just coasting on imagery and cliches. And this one is basically the unnecessary sequel that kind of has a little bit of setup to connect it to the previous movie, but it's basically just a collection of cliches where the scenes are interchangeable. They don't add up to very much. It ends up saying not very much. It just ends up filling time with familiar images. It's also a remake of Halloween 2. If you guys haven't seen that, Halloween 2 follows on directly from Halloween 1 with Laurie Strode in the hospital recovering from her injuries. And it's Halloween night, so everybody's kind of busy and distracted. And then Michael Myers comes to the hospital to finish the job and she has to escape. That's the plot of Halloween 2. Does that sound familiar?
Very much so.
Yeah. I hear you guys.
I'm just noticing this, right? I'm not actually convinced that Renny Harlin has enough self-awareness to actually do this, but it's indistinguishable from satire. I'm just saying. All right, time to wrap it up.
Well, for me personally, I think, like I said, I still had a good time with this. I just think it's unfair to criticize the film based on, some of the points that we've heard due to the fact, other, slasher movies do get away with what we saw today and they're successful. I do agree that slasher movies aren't really that great. It is a subgenre of obviously, horror, and it's something which is not my favorite, but it is fun to watch. I don't think it's something which you should kind of look into too much when it comes to things that you'd expect from other genres. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, a very good storyline, or like, I wouldn't say a story that didn't make sense because movies do need to make sense. But for me personally, I kind of show more grace to films like this, right? Just slasher movies, because I already know what I'm going to get with these ones. So that's why I was more gracious to this film, and I kind of like appreciated what they tried to attempt, even though it was elementary. But I think the main point of it was kind of like the shift in subgenre, because obviously it went from a psychological home invasion horror film to a survival slasher running around the whole town trying to survive type of movie, which for me it was enlightening, because like I said, I'm very familiar with the original movie, so kind of seeing how they progressed this film, and how, like I said, the whole point was the shift, right? Shift everything was a shift in change from the way that the strangers were kind of like hunting down the victim. They attempted to kind of like show the reasoning behind the madness of the strangers, which was elementary, but it was something which I appreciate. I said, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting, and it's cool. At least they tried to do something different. So like I said, I gave it more grace because it's a slasher, and I've seen this from other slasher movies as well. And some of the stuff that she was doing was stupid, but it was justifiable in slasher sense. I didn't try and nitpick too much because, like I said, this genre is already ridiculous in itself with the things that we see. So I'm gonna give this one a strong 6.5. I will definitely give them props for trying to do something different.
I think by now people know my thoughts on the movie. Did not have a good time with this one. Bit of a waste of time. Unfortunately, you kind of never really want to go to the cinema and feel like that, to be honest. But this one just didn't land with me, unfortunately. So I will give it a 2 out of 10.
I don't have terribly high standards when it comes to slashers. I just want to see an effort. I just want some amount of creativity or something impressive. I want like just a couple of impressive kills is already enough. And I think the average quality level of slasher movies is not that high. So I don't think it's that hard to impress me with a slasher movie. And this movie just neglected to do so. I don't think it builds on the mythology or the themes or the ideas of the previous ones. I don't think it develops them. I don't think it deviates from them in an interesting way. I think it's all unmotivated cliches that have been strung together with just one or two scenes here or there that are a little bit more interesting. But the bulk of it is one person running down a dark hallway being scared and teleporting slasher villains and like the most egregious cliches you can imagine. And I don't think it makes up for that by doing anything interesting, character wise, theme wise, skill wise, expertise wise, like on a filmmaking level, which all would have been possible. I think this is a naked cash grab that by itself does not doom the movie to being awful, but it's not a good starting point. What ultimately counts is the final result, and the final result is nothing impressive in any way. So that's a Y out of 5.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion.
If you reach this part of the episode, of course, as always, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you giving us a play and a listen. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, then you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys. You heard it here first. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.